Have you ever wondered how these mirrors in Nordcry function and how they fit into Genshin's current narrative? I'm here to tell you it's all part of a master plan to show us the powers of space. The powers of the Four Shades should be a combination of the Heavenly Principles' powers of time, death, life, and space. Through these powers, they created constellations of fate that would rule over the order of the world. But what really is fate, and how does dimensional warping come into play in the overarching story? Hoyo released the God's Limits trailer just before the new region, and let's just say it really got my wheels spinning. In the teaser, we learn the appearance and the identities of the Four Shades, along with a short peek into Piero's plan. I was honestly just admiring the art and details in my third watch because I take inspiration from Genshin a lot in my design works, and I noticed a very particular theme. And from the title of the video, you may have already realized that these concepts stretch far and wide into mirrors in different dimensions. We know that the heavenly principles are governing the world through a system of fate and stars. In this video, we're going to theorize in depth what the power of the Four Shades do regarding the regulation of fate. I'm also going to explain the concepts of higher and lower dimensions along with the characters and powers shown in game. In the end, we're going to circle back to the Wheel of Fate and how the higher powers influence the thrones at the wheel, including a discussion on past descenders and the role of the Traveler Twins. On that note, let's get right into it. I have my coffee ready, I'm Gemini, and I'm looking for forbidden knowledge. This is a leaks-free theory video. Jumping right into some contextual background, I mentioned in the opening that constellations and stars are how the heavenly principles govern the fate of Teyvat. To elaborate, fate is a system of predetermined moments in a person's future lifespan. For our characters in game, the visualization of someone's destiny is through their constellation. Each point is considered a pivotal moment in their life. The heavenly principles created this system, and the Four Shades are there to make sure the system works. The concept of destiny and stars were introduced through Mono, but it wasn't intrinsically tied to the Archon quest until Fontaine's arc, when Nicole spoke into our heads regarding the changing of fate or avoiding of prophecy. There are a few ways we've seen a character rewrite their fate. We saw Wanderer remove his past and his existence so that he could have a new future. We saw the Traveler's fateless existence in the world help others escape death. We also bypassed a prophecy in the world by defeating the all-devouring narwhal in the Abyssal Realm. Among many other examples, like the Hexen Circle's shenanigans, Durin, and Rukkhadevata. So we've seen many ways of cheating fate, but we still don't really know how fate is created. I will mention the Loom of Fate is a story arc shown over the course of the Archon Interlude quest. Until the Natlan expansion of the quest, we could only speculate on the powers of the Loom. We know now that the Loom is used to create new ley lines. The information within the Loom consists of the lives and memories of past Khaenri'ahns, and in the hands of our Abyss Twin, they're going to weave this information into our existing Irminsul, like installing a new expansion pack, in this case the Nordic DLC. Maybe there should be a small discussion on this because as of the information that we know now, the fate that Irminsul changes is the records of the past rather than the future, right? Almost every instance of leyline involvement really centers around what happened in the past. For example, the Stygian Onslaught domain is a memory of the wars that happened in the past, memory leakage that's only getting stronger and it only recently started budding, which is kind of scary. On a bigger scale, Li Yue's 7 and 8 Gates ritual during the 5.3 Lantern Rite had nodes that are imbued with energies of the past, like the Death Gate that Hu Tao attended to. The Death Gate that got its name from the mass casualties of floods and fires in its history. Of course, in the end, if the world is just the cycle, then the past is just the start of the future, but that's all too confusing for now. I just want to make the separation of fated future as opposed to the lived historical fate. So, on the sentiment of looking ahead, let me explain the design theory for this video. We're going to explore dots, lines, and shapes. I know, how exciting! But it's such a simple but effective design language to place into the world that they could easily build on. I guess that's just become my angle with my videos. My first two videos were about color theory, and this is just the step up. To set the tone, let me read you an excerpt from one of my design books. Dots, lines, and shapes. The three visual expressions we encountered when we first held a pencil as a child. Back then, a circle could become a head, a rectangle could become a car or a dog, a wavy line could become water or a snail, and a dot could become an eye or even a planet. And even more, when it came to dots, lines, and shapes as children, we could create anything based on our imagination. As we grew up, larger amounts of visual noise began to surround us, so filtering out valuable visual content became more difficult. Today, our imagination is limited by visual chaos, so we instinctively try to return to basic form. Unlike children, we have forgotten how to use these forms to create anything that we want. In Genshin though, if we look at some of the constellations, it really is the easiest way to demonstrate this in action. Constellations consist of dots from memories in a person's life, and each dot is joined together by lifelines to guide it to its next point. All of these combine to create a shape, and that's pretty simple to grasp, right? Now, if we use some imagination and translate this to the power of the four shades all have a fraction of Faunus's power of fate. Istaroth is the shade of moments and governs every dot in the constellation, every tick of time. Renova is the shade of death and governs the two-dimensional beginnings and endings of a line. Nibirius, the shade of life, governs the creation of living shapes in our three-dimensional world. In the shade of space, Asmodee is just the Just kidding, the next part will be all about her, but I have to say a lot of this theory is actually stemmed from these four stylized arts of the four shades along with their symbolism. Istaroth has a circular clock, Renova with her eyes made out of two lines, Nibirius' prism, which looks really out of place within all of the 2D shapes, and Asmodee's four-pointed star and cube. We can actually further extrapolate from this information because there's another layer of details embedded in their symbols. I'm going to use this opportunity to explain dimensions and how they function in Teyvat. How does the subspace teapot actually house all of this space? How does Skirk use her powers of the abyss to create portals? And that's with the powers of space and dimensions, of course. Dimensional powers are throughout the game, including our limited events that are set in two-dimensional worlds and even the domains that we farm that are linked to past space-time. Let me explain the fundamentals of higher and lower dimensions. Obviously, the game and us in real life, we live in 3 dimensions. Shapes that represent this include cubes, prisms, which have 3 axes, height, width, and depth. 2-dimensional shapes would remove one of these axes. For example, the square and a triangle, which would just have width and depth. To get to 1 dimension, you'd have to remove another axis, and either way you are left with a line. To explain this in terms of movement though, to move in one direction is being able to walk back and forth in one line only. 2-dimensional movement is being able to move left and right as well as front and back. The 3rd dimension of movement is being able to jump, because you're moving up and down as well as the other directions. Now for the interesting part about this concept, if there was a 2-dimensional being living in a 2-dimensional world, it would be akin to a stick figure that's living on a flat piece of paper. There is no height or depth to this realm, and the paper itself would represent the edge of the world. The stick figure on one side of the paper would never see the underside of it. Not only that, they would only be able to move 2-dimensionally left, right, and up, down if they jump. If you were the creator of this stick figure in your godly 3-dimensional realm, you would see this as a laughing matter as you traverse the higher world with ease. The stick figure wouldn't see that you're jumping, skipping, and hopping. They wouldn't see you at all. But what if you were just the same way as your stick figure and that there was a higher dimensional being laughing at you? Those beings are of course able to travel the world that you can't even fathom. This might be what our traveler is experiencing throughout her encounters with higher powers. And let's look at some examples of that in game, shall we? Starting with the lower dimensions, there aren't too many depictions of one-dimensional beings as they would literally be existing on a line, but if we stretch this to a kind of make-believe setting, this could be akin to a snake that's just slithering along a circle that goes on infinitely. In terms of 2-dimensional life forms, let's look at the self-proclaimed almighty Dragon Lord, Kahul Ahau. His appearance has always been heavily debated, with the topic mainly regarding his dimensionality. I've just been waiting for this plot device to be explained because he is one of the 13 Dragon Lords created by the first Pyro Sovereign. All 13 of these Dragon Lords are beings of artificial intelligence. That's why Ahau glides through the game like it's a platformer, but has personalities and memories of his own. In many ways, you could argue that he is a living being. Ahau is suggested to be the 10th Dragon Lord, while Inefa is the 11th. Inefa is an artificial intelligence as well, and it seems like there is a motif of 2-dimensionality with her. but more specifically her assistant robot, Brigida. If we stretch this to include other mechanisms that we've met like Ben, Harkada, and maybe even Sandrona herself, all of these have developed a semi or full conscience through having their own memories. All of these beings were assumed to be created by three-dimensional beings, a being of higher power. So what I believe is happening here is that Genshin is relaying a theme that artificial intelligence lifeforms are two-dimensional. Another great example of 2D lifeform is in Inazuma, where we should examine Kamuna Harunosuke. He was a person from 500 years ago that trained under the guides of the Tengu, but then left for Liyue over the course of the Cataclysm as he experienced his friends and mentors fall one by one. We've already had an in-depth look at Liyue, so it's time to cross the seas. Inazuma is a bit of a forgotten territory when it comes to lore because, quite honestly, most of us wanted it to be over so we could experience nicer weather. So for the sake of some of my friends, let me do a quick rundown of relevant Inazuman context. 500 years ago, when the region was run by Raiden Makoto, within the royal court, there was her twin Raiden A, the great Tengu Sasayuri, the Kitsune Saigu, and the Oni Chiyo. The powers we're looking at relates to Sasayuri, but more specifically the Tengu. Sasayuri had a successor after he perished in battle against Orabashi, the serpent that dwelt in Enkanomiya. The successor was called Raisenbo and was the mentor of Harunosuke that cultivated Onmyodo. By the way, Onmyodo stands for the way of the yin-yang. Inazuman arts in general are very fascinating because a lot of them have the innate ability to shapeshift, including the kitsunes, tanukis, and of course the tengu. The tengu also have the ability to manipulate weather using a feathered fan. For example, the red feathered fan that we use as a gadget controls winds. And in our roster of characters, Tengu are represented by Kujo Sada. Through her powers of lightning and appearance of black wings and a red mask, these are all motifs of the traditional Tengu. Their art specifically is the power of transcension according to an event quest in version 2.2. It can be assumed that it's the power of transmuting, which is more alchemy related if you think about it. It's just the power to make something transcend from one state to another. Feels very magnum opus. Anyway, within this event, we also learn of a paper figure called Shiki Taisho. Shiki is a spirit known as Shikigami. These spirits in Japanese get summoned and bound through a command or order. This specific figure was commanded to help protect Inazuma from monsters and the calamity from 500 years ago. Shiki was also created by Harunosuke with Onmyodo. In this case, the Kamuna family already had the tradition of imbuing magic onto paper, specifically for samurais to use elemental powers. So it's up to debate what he learned from the Adepti, but my guess is that he learnt the means to imbue life or sentience. If you picked up on the fact that this paper figure is another great representation of two-dimensional lifeform, you get a point. Within this quest, we learn that Shiki has lost his memories, so over the course of the story, we were picking up fragments of himself to piece everything together. And quite literally too, as the pages of himself literally combine to restore the past. This is very interesting find when talking about dimensions, because as a two-dimensional being, Shiki's third dimensional was in fact time, but more specifically, his memories. So far we've only spoken about the first to the third dimensions, because the fourth dimension really is the rest of the iceberg. To start explaining the fourth dimension, let's go back to shapes and the axes. Remember how we were removing axes to reduce dimensions? To increase dimensions, we could actually add one, and this fourth axis, however, has to be perpendicular to the existing X, Y, and Z. If this is difficult to visualize, you'd be correct, but there are shapes out there that actually describe this phenomenon. The prime example of this is of course the Tesseract. The Tesseract is a 4D cube. This cube has been extruded, therefore it seems alien to look at. The cube appears to us in a constant movement because it's phasing in and out of the four-dimensional space. The Tesseract is often associated with the powers of space, and looking at the prime example of the MCU, the Tesseract contains the powers of the Infinity Stone, and you guessed it, it was the power of the Space Stone. To help us explain this in relation to Genshin, it's Asmodee time, and I'm sure for some of you it may have already clicked where this is going. Asmodee is the shade of space and has the power of the Black Cube. Her cubes are assumed to contain the different worlds. As shown in the God's Limits trailer, we got to see Renova put an end to one of her realms. It's because her powers and cubes are black that we never really see what's inside, but I suspect the shape of her powers to be more likened to a tesseract, so that in actuality the lineup of the shade's powers include infinite time, lines of rebirth and death, prisms of life, and Tesseracts of space. This thought experiment actually has fun implications to the world structure of Teyvat. For example, assuming the Tesseract's powers are on a worldly scale, and Teyvat is just within one, if the surface world or the light realm is where we reside in, the inner cube or the dark realm could be the underground space for Khaenri'ah or the abyss. This picture gets even more vivid when you see my last video regarding the yin-yang. This is all stemming from the symbolism of shapes and balance, but what really is the power of space in action? Our first introduction to the concept of subspace was through the quest when we entered Madame Ping's teapot. She was holding Guizhong's cleansing bell within her subspace realm and needed our help in retrieving it. We enter a space created through adeptal arts, and somehow we are able to use the same powers to create our own teapot later on. It is still untold how Madame Ping knows how to cultivate the arts of space, but as per my last video, one of the 8 adepts who may wield gourd magic might be able to lead us closer to this knowledge. The concept of subspace was also used within the omni-ubiquity nets we use to capture animals. The net carries the animal's essence so that you can carry them to another space, like your very own teapot. This technology was also created through the art of Onmyodo, the same arts that created Shiki Taisho. Spaces are also affected by time differently. We learn this within the Night Kingdom in Natlan, but also in the Abyssal Pocket Realm that Skirk resides in. It's interesting that the teapot and other related adeptal spaces seem unaffected by time. Maybe some spaces are made with Istaroth's acknowledgements, and maybe some aren't. On the other end of the spectrum though, there are spaces that are completely frozen in time, and we see them all throughout Nod Cry, and it's such a smart way to introduce visible subspaces in the world that's just through mirrors. I'm sure a lot of us logically understood that the mirror realm was an extra dimension. It's essentially a space that's contained within one segment of our space-time, almost comparable to a segment of memory from a paper figure. In the same line, when the waters reflect the world of the past, it is metaphorically mirroring a segment of memory, or history. You could say that the Nod Cry version of creating subspace is freezing the memory of the past, and maybe this could be a reflection of the Frost Moon's power. Nod Cry's moon mirrors are also affected by the push and pull of Kuvaki. The magnetic energies transcend space just like the scientific counterparts of magnetic field and electromagnetic wave. When there are changes in the magnetic field, electromagnetic waves are released. These waves, including visible light, are self-propagating energies, and they do not need a medium to travel, meaning they are able to continuously create waves on their own so that they travel even through the vacuums of space. This may explain why the moon's powers are able to create portals that travel space despite taking immense amount of energy. Another example of space that's suspended in a segment of time, of course, is the Mare Javari. We know this because Venti tells us that they've stolen the winds of time within the Sea of Ashes at the end of the 5.8 summer event. This means that while time is moving in the outside world, the Mare Javari became a hunk of space just stuck in the moment in time. As he also mentioned that there is more chapters to the Mare after his involvement, but those could be regarding Nambarius and Rhindaughter's shenanigans with Bakunawa. While I would love to further indulge in the discussion of dimensions and physics in Genshin, I believe the next step gets a bit more complicated because it pertains to quantum mechanics, so maybe we save that for another video. Returning to our topic at hand though, all that talk was still regarding Asmodee's powers of space and how it could be utilized. To summarize, the powers of the 4 shades seemed to ascend in dimension, whereas the shade of time governed each and every point. Asmodee governed the spaces of 4 dimensions. Now that we have a better understanding of what all 4 shades do, I think it's time to go back to Faunus and look at how they use the powers to govern fate. Before we start this section, I'd like to make a disclosure that this is really heavy on the speculation and theory side, but I just think that the coincidences are quite interesting. I'd also like to harken back to the concept in my last video regarding balance and equilibrium, because we're going to be talking about the Wheel of Fate specifically and its balance. The Wheel of Fate is a concept popular in Greek and Roman mythology as well as Buddhism. The Roman goddess Fortuna governed luck and fate. She had a rotary that symbolizes her power over fortune, and in Buddhist though, the Wheel of Dharma is a concept that means the wheel of truth, and it represents the cycle of life, or the samsara. The 8 spokes around the wheel represent the noble 8-fold paths. These are virtues that one must follow to transcend the samsara or reach nirvana. But let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered what the point of this was? Bennett's constellation hanging up in the sky during the 5.8 summer quest. These events usually give us a range of hints towards the next region's stories, and these 6 stars spoke with a sinister and senile voice. as an agent of fate chasing down Bennett's death, the death that he cheated due to his parents' wish, meaning Bennett's life outside Natlan is more likened to the Final Destination movies rather than clumsy accidents. As a community, we've long theorized that Bennett was from Natlan, therefore considering Sandrona just got a few dialogues in her reveal that she's Marianne from Fontaine, they could have easily gone without these glaring visuals. Why was this entity talking in the form of his fate or constellation when he could have been any abyssal entity or any hooded figure? Therefore, I theorized that it was more symbolic to the heavenly principle's powers. The Wheel of Misfortune, which is his constellation, is represented by a broken wheel of 6 stars. To fix this, we would need to add 2 more stars, and assuming that this fixed wheel with 8 stars is the true Wheel of Fate, then this could have some fun implications, because 8 pointed stars are everywhere, from the symbol of Khaenri'ah, Hex and Circle, and even Mona, but also representing the sun in Mahuika's design language and Bennett's ultimate. Mini-theory section here. I actually believe that this symbol represents the sun, and it's just that the Khaenri'an sun is black because it represents the Eclipse dynasty, so they had a black sun, right? And it visually makes so much more sense if Mona's costume had a sun and a moon motif because the stars everywhere else in her design have 4 points. So if the Wheel of Fate is shaped like the sun, this could mean that Nibelung could have been the first to govern fate as the Black Sun. We see this with his creation of the moon to do so in his absence, and the current sun could be represented by the heavenly principles. Anyway, back to the 8-pointed star. The star represents symmetry and balance on all sides, and the world was at peace being governed by the sun, either the black sun or the white sun. We've actually seen examples of this 8-pointed star increase in points, because Deshret himself was represented by a 10-pointed star after he traversed the abyss. This imbalance and symmetry in his being may be the reason he released forbidden knowledge onto the world, as his rule was not in order. But actually, in the Song of the Welkin Moon web event specifically tells us the Wheel of Fate is currently pointing in 11 directions, so it's still increasing in directions. The Wheel of Fate in the web event contains different factions in power that will tell the story of the region. These factions all have different authors, and there is also an inner and outer circle of factions. So far, the story up to Luna 2 covers the factions within the center, while the story later on will cover the 8 factions on the outer circle. To compare this to the functions of Teyvat's overall Wheel of Fate, these could be the higher powers that are governing the world, or the thrones in heaven. There are 7 elemental thrones in heaven and 4 shades. Together they make 11 forces of higher powers that govern fate at the moment. What's interesting is how this all still ties to the Buddhist wheel of Dharma. You see, this wheel also increases in spokes, but only in certain sets of numbers. 8, 12, and 24. The 8 wheel represents the eightfold paths. The 12 spokes wheel represents the 12 nidanas, which are the balance of cause and effect. The 24 spokes version includes the mirrored forms of the previous 24, and altogether it represents the liberation of the cycle of rebirth. Just a little note here, because there is technically the heavenly principles counting as one of the orthants, this could already be the 12 that already exists, but all this to say, just like the balance that was reached when the Wheel of Fate has 8 spokes, I believe that there need to be a newly created order or throne in heaven for the 12 orthants for symmetry and order. This could be why there is a new moon ascending, or it could be the power of the traveler. Maybe the 12th throne is missing because the heavenly principles or the person who controls the Logos is currently sleeping. There is, however, still a looming question on how the Wheel of Fate or the sun symbol went from 8 to 10 and 10 to 11. In relation to ascension of newer power, I believe these are the effects of descenders on the world. The descenders of the world should have the same constitution, as they should not be governed or be affected by the laws of fate. Well, except the Abyss Twin for now. The transcendent powers of descenders are always regarding their will, especially being powerful enough to overcome the will of the world. This to me is a discourse on fate versus free will. With the ability of free will, they are able to function outside the confines of the system of fate. We see this when the Traveler saves Hu Tao from literally dying in the 5.3 Lantern Rite, or still remembering Scaramouche or Rukkhadevata after their erasure. We're pretty familiar with the Traveler's story, so let's do a little case study on the third descender, named Saralainen. In the story of the Hymns of the Far North, the third descender falls in love with a lady assumed to be the Tsaritsa. He travels the land of Hisi Island and the Abyss just to court her in her homeland. However, the Tsaritsa's conservatorship at the time, an old man called Pakaisuko, would only grant Saralainen her hand in marriage If he opened the gates to the abyss, this descender knew that he would be punished by the heavenly principles, but out of love he willingly did it. And just as he expected, his body was split into 7 pieces that are assumed to be the gnosis. He did this because he knew that if he didn't do it, old man Pakaisuko would have requested his daughter to do it instead, so it was all quite a tragic and romantic story. Reminder, we can assume this man in the story is the 3rd descender because Skirk tells us that the gnosis are the remains of the 3rd descender. If we really analyze the story, this tells us that before getting split up, Saralainen had either all the powers, energy or authority over the elements, as well as the powers to traverse or at least open an abyssal gate. We don't know if the daughter was able to wield other elements, but since Pakaisuko would have asked his daughter to open the abyssal gate, maybe the Tsuritsu's powers are a bit more layered than just cryo. Maybe she's more closely related to the moon's powers. The combination of powers the 3rd descender had is very similar to the trajectory of our traveler is experiencing. Not only are we able to collect all of the elemental powers, Skirk also mentions we can learn to control the abyss if we wanted to. We also did have some practice navigating chaotic spaces all the way back in the Chasm quest. But what really is the consequence of having free will? Having free will in this world means we can accumulate power in order to achieve our goals. Because we are unbound by fate, we can not only pick up multiple elements that would have been restricted by visions, we might be even able to wield the authorities of the Shade. We've already seen Khaenri'ahns do it, why not us? This means that by having free will, we are a threat to the power balance of the world's order, and as a beacon of light energy, we are the primal force in movement and progress as well. With all that said and done, let's go over everything we've discussed here. We talked about how there are different types of fate, the fate of the past and the future. One is summarized through forms of memories, including the Irminsul tree, while the other is written in the stars. The way that the heavenly principles govern fate is through constellations that are systems of dots, lines, and shapes. These powers seem to translate into the power of the 4 shades, as Istaroth governs dot, Renova governs lines, and Nibiru shapes. The symbols of Istaroth is one-dimensional, and it increases to the 4th dimension, which symbolizes Asmodee's powers of space. Asmodee's Tesseract, along with other abyssal powers, represents the powers of the 4th dimension, while Ahau's and Shiki Taisho shows us how 2-dimensional beings could exist and function in Teyvat. This power of dimensions extend to the landscape of the world, including the moon mirrors and mirror Javari that have been segmented or frozen in time. With the powers of space, we looked at higher powers that could be steering the wheel of fate, and comparisons to the wheel, specifically the wheel of Dharma, that indicate a growing number of spokes or thrones to be added over time, which could indicate the roles of different descenders and how they changed the formula of the world using their free will. Okay, with all that said, it's near the end of the video, so this is a reminder: if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment about any thoughts you might have, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video, where I might try and investigate the root races of all of the animals and creatures in Teyvat. I probably need to think of questions that are narrower, honestly, so I don't destroy my brain, but where's the fun in that? Okay, thanks for watching, bye! If the world is cyclic. If the world is cyclic. What? Feels very magnum opus-y. Anyway, wait.